Hi everyone and welcome back to Ochigurumi. In today's tutorial, I'll be showing you how to crochet this super cute Psyche K inspired cake storage box. Let's get started. We'll first start by making the cake base. To begin, make a magic circle, and then single crochet 6 into the magic circle. For round 2, make 6 increases, so that's 2 single crochets into each stitch for a total of 12 stitches. For round 3, we'll do a pattern of 1 increase, followed by 1 single crochet. Repeat this pattern all the way around. For round 4, start off by making 1 single crochet, followed by 1 increase. Next, do a pattern of 2 single crochets, followed by 1 increase. Repeat this pattern 4 more times. To finish off, make 1 single crochet. For round 5, do a pattern of 3 single crochets, followed by 1 increase. Repeat this pattern all the way around. For round 6, start by making 2 single crochets, followed by 1 increase. Continue by doing a pattern of 4 single crochets, followed by 1 increase. Repeat this 4 more times. To finish off, make 2 single crochets. For round 7, do a pattern of 5 single crochets, followed by 1 increase. Repeat this pattern all the way around. For round 8, start off by making 3 single crochets, followed by 1 increase. Then, do a pattern of 6 single crochets, followed by 1 increase. Repeat this pattern all the way around. Finish off by making 3 single crochets. For round 9, do a pattern of 7 single crochets, followed by 1 increase. Repeat this all the way around. For the next round, start off by making 4 single crochets, followed by 1 increase. Continue by doing a pattern of 8 single crochets, followed by 1 increase. Repeat this pattern 4 more times. Finish off by making 4 single crochets. For round 11, do a pattern of 9 single crochets, followed by 1 increase. Repeat this pattern all the way around. For round 12, start off by making 5 single crochets, followed by 1 increase. Continue by doing a pattern of 10 single crochets, followed by 1 increase. Repeat this pattern 4 more times. Finish off by making 5 single crochets. For the next round, do a pattern of 11 single crochets, followed by 1 increase. Continue this pattern all the way around. Before continuing with the rest of the cake, take a yarn needle and weave in the tail end that was left over from the magic circle. For this next round, we're going to do back loop only single crochets all the way around. This is so we can start building up the rest of the cake. Once you're done that, you're going to do 5 rows of just single crochet all the way around. I recommend using a notepad to keep tally of your rows for this part. Once you have 1 stitch left before completing row 19, you're going to switch the color to white. To do this, go through the stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop with a light yellow yarn. You should have 2 loops on your hook at this point. Then, take your white yarn, make a slip knot, and pull it through the 2 loops of yellow. Adjust it as needed and there's your color change. For this next round, we'll do back loop only slip stitches all the way around. This will help us create a clean color change. Once you finish that round, continue on to round 21 by making back loop only single crochets all the way around. After you've made a few stitches, cut the yellow yarn and leave a short tail for weaving in later. For rounds 22 to 24, just do single crochets all the way around. So that's 78 single crochets in each row for a total of 3 rows. Once you've got 1 stitch left in row 24, we're going to switch back to the light yellow yarn. We'll repeat the same steps as earlier. Make a slip knot with the yellow yarn. Yarn over and pull up a loop using the white. You should have 2 loops of white on the hook at this point. Then, pull the slip knot of yellow yarn through both of those loops and your color change is complete. Adjust the tension of the slip knot as needed. For row 25, we'll do another round of back loop only slip stitches all the way around. Then, for row 26, we'll do 78 back loop only single crochets. To continue, do 5 rows of just regular single crochet all the way around. Once we're a few single crochets into row 27, I like to cut off the white yarn and weave in the tail ends before continuing. Then, keep crocheting until you've finished all 5 rows. Once you're done, pull the yarn long, cut it, and weave in the end to make a nice clean edge. To do this, weave in the end from front to back under both loops of the second stitch of the round. Then, weave it through the back loop only of the last stitch. Once that's done, just weave in the remaining tail end through the back of the work. Once you're done, put the cake base on your container. You also might want to use some double-sided tape to make sure it stays on. Now let's move on to making the strawberry slices. To do this, cut out some small teardrop shapes from red and pink felt. Make sure to make the pink ones slightly smaller than the red ones. I ended up making 12 total. Once you've cut out all the pieces, you can either felt them or glue them together. Once you've finished making the strawberries, place them on the cake to get an idea of where you want them to go. Then, glue them onto the base. I used E6000 glue, but you could also use fabric glue, a glue gun, or you can even sew them on. It's all up to personal preference. Once we've finished gluing on the strawberries, it'll look something like this. Now we'll move on to making the icing. For the first 6 rows, we're just going to repeat the exact same steps as we did for the base. Once you get to row 7, we'll make a slight adjustment by doing the pattern of 5 single crochets, 1 increase in the back loop only. This will allow us to attach the cake topper later on without having to sew it. Once you've finished round 7, continue the same steps that we did for the cake base for rows 8 to 13. For round 14, make single crochets all the way around in the back loop only. After that, do 2 rounds of regular single crochet all the way around. Next, we'll crochet the rounded edges of the frosting. To do this, start by making 1 single crochet. Then, you'll have to make 4 treble crochets. To do this, wrap the yarn around your hook twice. Then, go into the next stitch and pull up a loop. Yarn over, pull through 2 loops. Yarn over, pull through 2 loops again. And yarn over and pull through 2 for the 3rd time. Repeat this 3 more times. To finish off, make 1 single crochet. Repeat this pattern all the way around. Once you've finished round 17, chain 1, pull the yarn long, cut it, and weave in the end through the back of the work. Now we'll start working on the cake topper of Psyche's head. If you remember, we did a row of back loop only single crochet in round 7 of the icing. We'll work our single crochets into those so we can attach the head without having to sew it on. This is the back of the work, so we're going to start with this loop right here. We'll use a 2.75mm hook. Using your peach colored yarn, pull up a loop and chain 1. Into that same stitch, we'll do a single crochet. Try to cover the yarn tail as you're doing this. I'll mark the start of my round with a stitch marker. That was the first loop, and the next one we're going to work into is this one here. Remember that since we were working in continuous rounds, it's going to be disjointed at the back. So go through the next loop and make a single crochet. Continue by making a single crochet into each of the next 3 loops. After that, we'll make an increase. So that's 2 single crochets into the same loop. We'll continue this pattern of 5 single crochets, 1 increase all the way around until we're back at the start. At the end of the round, we should have 42 stitches total. To join the round, make a slip stitch into the first stitch. Into that same stitch, make a single crochet. Mark this single crochet with your stitch marker. This is what we've got so far. So we've just crocheted around with the peach yarn into those loops. Continue by making 2 more single crochets, followed by 1 increase, and then do a pattern of 6 single crochets, plus 1 increase. Repeat this 4 more times. To finish off, make 3 single crochets. Remember, we marked our first single crochet with the stitch marker. Don't get it confused with that slip stitch that we used to join the round. To start round 3, we're going to skip the slip stitch and make a single crochet right into that first stitch of the round. Mark it with the stitch marker. After this, we'll just be crocheting in continuous rounds, no more slip stitches. For round 3, the repeating pattern is 7 single crochets, plus 1 increase. Continue this all the way around. For rows 4 to 18, we're just going to do single crochet all the way around for a total of 15 rows. Before continuing with the rest of the head, we're going to add his ears. Turn your work to the side and count up 8 rows from the bottom. Into that 8th row, pull up a loop, chain 1, and then make a single crochet into that same stitch, making sure to cover the yarn tail as you're doing this. Next, we'll go into row 9 and do the same thing. Go into the stitch and make a single crochet. Continue this all the way across until you've got a total of 6 single crochets. Once you're done that first row, it'll look something like this. To continue, turn your work but don't make any turning chains to keep the work as straight as possible. For the next 2 rows, just do single crochets all the way across. For row 4, we'll start by making a decrease. To do this, go into the first stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop. Then, go into the next stitch, yarn over and pull up another loop. Yarn over and pull through all of the loops on your hook, and there's your decrease. Then, continue by making 2 single crochets, followed by 1 decrease. For the last row, make 2 decreases. Once you're done, chain 1, pull the yarn long, cut it, and weave in the end on the wrong side of the work. Now that the first ear is done, let's make the second one. To make sure they're the right distance apart, place a stitch marker into the stitch that lines up with the first ear. Then, place another stitch marker 30 stitches to the right of the first one. This will give us a good idea of where to place the other ear. Once you've done that, just repeat all of the steps we did previously to make the second ear. Now let's continue with the rest of the head. For round 19, we'll do a pattern of 7 single crochets, followed by 1 invisible decrease. In order to do this, go through the front loop only of the first stitch, and then the front loop only of the second one. Yarn over and pull through 2, then yarn over and pull through 2 again, and there's your invisible decrease. Repeat this all the way around. For the next round, start off by making 3 single crochets, followed by 1 decrease. Continue by doing a pattern of 6 single crochets, followed by 1 decrease. Repeat this 4 more times. To finish off, make 3 single crochets. For round 21, we'll do a pattern of 5 single crochets, followed by 1 decrease. Repeat this all the way around. For round 22, start off by making 2 single crochets, followed by 1 decrease. Continue by doing a pattern of 4 single crochets, followed by 1 decrease. Repeat this pattern 4 more times. To finish off, make 2 single crochets. Before we continue, add some stuffing. For round 23, we'll do a pattern of 3 single crochets, followed by 1 decrease. Repeat this pattern all the way around. For round 24, start by making 1 single crochet, followed by 1 decrease. Then, do a pattern of 2 single crochets, followed by 1 decrease. Repeat this pattern 4 more times. To finish off, make 1 single crochet. For round 25, do a pattern of 1 single crochet, followed by 1 decrease, all the way around. You should have 12 stitches at the end of the round. Before we go ahead and do the last round, finish stuffing the head. For round 26, just do 6 decreases. Once you're done, pull the yarn long, cut it, and weave in the end. To do this, go through the front loop only of each stitch. Then, pull on the tail to close it up. To hide the remaining yarn, push the yarn tail through the center of the last round and pull it out through another part of the head. Pull tightly and cut off any excess. Now that we're done the head, we'll start crocheting the hair. To start off, we'll repeat the steps from rows 1 through 9 that we did for the cake base. Once you're done crocheting round 9, we'll start crocheting the back part of the hair. To do this, chain 1, turn, and then make 27 single crochets. We'll do this for 5 rows total. Once you've finished crocheting the last row, we'll move on to row 15. Start by making 1 decrease, followed by 23 single crochets, and then 1 decrease. To start the next row, chain 1 and turn. We'll just single crochet all the way across for the next 10 rows. For row 26, start off by making 3 single crochets, followed by 1 decrease. Repeat this pattern all the way across. We'll use that exact same repeating pattern for row 27. For the next row, we'll do a pattern of 3 single crochets, plus 1 decrease, for a total of 3 times. To finish off, make 1 single crochet. For the last 2 rows, just do single crochet all the way across. Once you're done, chain 1, pull the yarn long, cut it, and weave in the end on the wrong side of the work. I've just pinned the hairpiece to the head so you can get an idea of what it should look like so far. In the next part, we'll start working on the small triangular hair pieces at the front. Now we'll start working on the bangs. We'll start on this side and then work our way around. First, let's remove the stitch marker so it's not in the way. And we're actually not going to start in this first stitch, but rather this corner here where the back of the hair ends. I'm going to use a different color of yarn just so it's easier to see. So into this corner, pull up a loop, chain 1, and then into that same stitch make a single crochet. I'll mark this first stitch with the stitch marker. Continue by working 4 more single crochets across. Now we have 5 single crochets in total. To continue, turn without making a turning chain and do another 5 single crochets for row 2. For row 3, we'll do 3 single crochets, followed by 1 decrease. For row 4, start with a decrease, and then make 2 single crochets. Make 1 single crochet plus 1 decrease for row 5. Row 6 will just be 1 decrease. To finish off, chain 1 and leave a bit of a tail to weave in later. Let's continue on to the next piece. I'll be switching to a different color again. For this second hair piece, we won't be sharing any stitches with the previous one, so pull up a loop, chain 1, and make your first single crochet all into this free stitch here. Again, I'll mark this with my stitch marker, and then continue with 4 more single crochets. Turn, no turning chain, and start row 2 with 1 decrease, plus 3 single crochets. Row 3 will be 2 single crochets, followed by 1 decrease. For row 4, make 1 decrease, plus 1 single crochet. Then finish off by making 1 decrease for row 5. Chain 1 and leave a bit of a tail like before. For the next hair piece, we are not sharing any stitches with the previous one. So just like before, go into the next free stitch, pull up a loop, chain 1, and make a single crochet. Continue by making 4 more single crochets. For row 2, start with 1 decrease, followed by 3 single crochets. Row 3 will be 2 decreases, and row 4 will just be 1 decrease. Chain 1 and leave a tail for weaving in later. For the fourth hair strand, we are actually going to go into this stitch here where the corner of the previous strand is. So into that shared stitch, pull up a loop, chain 1, and make a single crochet. Continue by making 4 more single crochets. For row 2, make 3 single crochets, followed by 1 decrease. Row 3 will be 2 decreases, and row 4 will just be 1 decrease. Just like before, chain 1 and leave a short tail. For the next piece, we will not be sharing any stitches, so into the next free stitch, pull up a loop, chain 1, and to make a single crochet. Continue by making 4 single crochets. Row 2 will be 3 single crochets, plus 1 decrease. For row 3, make 1 decrease, then 2 single crochets. Start with a single crochet for row 4, followed by 1 decrease. Finish the last row with 1 decrease, then chain 1 and leave a short tail for weaving in later. Now on to the very last piece. We will not be sharing any stitches with the previous strand, so into the next free stitch, pull up a loop, chain 1, and make a single crochet. Continue by making 4 more single crochets. Make the last one into the stitch where the corner of the back of the hair is. For row 2, just make 5 single crochets. Then row 3 will start with a decrease, followed by 3 single crochets. Row 4 will be 2 single crochets plus 1 decrease. Make 1 decrease, followed by 1 single crochet for row 5. Finish off the last row with a decrease, then chain 1 and cut the yarn. This is what it'll look like before you've weaved in the ends. Now that we've finished crocheting all of the front hair pieces, we'll pin the hair onto the head for sewing. I like to place a pin right through the very first round of both the hair and the head to make sure it's centered. Then, place a pin into each of the front strands, as well as some in the back. Use a sewing needle and matching thread to sew the hair on. Start in the bottom left corner on the back of the head. Tie a knot in the very first stitch to make sure it's secure. Hide the sewing tail thread underneath the hair and continue sewing all the way around. Now let's make his glasses. Start by cutting out the main part from a piece of gray felt. You can screenshot this and use it as a guide if you'd like. I like to fold the felt in half and then cut around half of the guide so that both sides are symmetrical. Make the legs of the glasses longer than you think they'll need to be, as you can just cut off any excess later. For the lenses, cut them out using green felt. Once you like the shape, glue them onto the frames. I used fabric glue. Then, set them aside to dry. For the nose, I used a felting needle and some roving to make a small cone shape. To make the roving, brush out some pieces of yarn using a pet brush. Roll the roving into a small cylinder shape and then felt it more on one side to create the tip of the cone. You might have to cut off some of the excess on the other end like you see me doing here. Once you've finished making the cone, felt it onto the face. Then, sew on the glasses. For the mouth, you can cut out a piece of pink felt and felt it onto the face as you see me doing here. I found that this color was too light, so I ended up felting the mouthpiece using roving I made out of a darker pink yarn. Once you've added his mouth, your Psyche cake will look something like this. The final step is to make his hair clips and then attach them to the head. To do this, take some pink yarn, make a magic circle, and then make 6 single crochets into the magic circle. Pull on the tail to close it up. Continue by making an increase in every stitch. For rounds 3 to 4, just make a single crochet in every stitch. Mark the start of the round using a stitch marker. For row 5, make 6 invisible decreases. So remember, go into the front loop only of the 2 stitches, yarn over and pull through 2, then yarn over and pull through 2 again. Continue this all the way around. Before you finish the very last decrease, we're going to switch the color to gray. To do this, go through the front loops only of the 2 stitches as you normally would, and yarn over and pull through 2 with the pink yarn. To finish off, you'll yarn over and pull through 2 using the gray yarn. Now that we've changed colors, you'll just do 3 rows of single crochet 6 in gray. Try to go over the yarn tails as you're doing this to help secure them. After making that first single crochet in gray, mark the start of the round with a stitch marker and cut the pink yarn. When you're working with a small number of stitches like this, it's really easy to skip one by accident, so I like to count them just in case, as well as using the stitch marker to mark the start of the round. Once you're done the first row of single crochet, tuck in the remaining yarn tails into the piece before continuing. Now that we're done the 3 rows in gray, chain 1. If you were going to use the yarn tail to sew, you would leave a long tail like this. I'm going to use a sewing needle and thread, so I'm going to leave a shorter one and hide it inside the piece. Once you've made both of his hairpins, pin them onto the head in round 8. Also make sure that they line up with the ears. Then, just take your sewing needle and thread and attach them to the head. Start by going through the inside of the hairpin, as this will help hide the end of the thread. Then, go through a piece of the hair. Make a knot at the beginning to make sure the thread is secure. Then, just continue sewing all the way around. I like to go around twice, as this helps to make sure the piece is totally secure. Once you're done, the Psyche cake box should look something like this. I'm super happy with how this turned out, and I'm sure it'll be a great addition to my workspace. If you follow me on Instagram, then you'll know I decided to make this project to celebrate reaching 100 subscribers. I still cannot believe that there's over 100 of you who are interested in seeing my content, and I am so grateful for all your support. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up. You can also subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified when I post more videos like this in the future. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to leave them in the comments down below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you again for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.